You know what really, really sucked? Growing up in middle school and loving sci-fi and loving fantasy and never once seeing someone who looked like me or my friends or my family in any of those books that I read. Hi, hello, my name is Ash. Welcome to Pages in the Stars. If you're new here, hello. If you're returning, welcome back. And if you haven't already subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button down below so you can be alerted to all my bookish, non-bookish, and sometimes, like today, quite ranty content. With it being Black History Month, one thing that I really wanted to talk about is the importance of Black joy in books and why we need to see it more. I grew up in middle school loving sci-fi, loving fantasy, as I said, but never seeing myself represented in those books. I never got to see Black girls, Black boys in fantasy stories, in sci-fi stories, fighting aliens, taking down dragons, storming castles, rescuing princesses, the whole 9 yards. And those were the types of stories that I loved. But people who looked like me and my friends and my family did not exist in them. We got Black trauma narratives. We got stories about being slaves. We got stories about the trauma of the civil rights movement. We got the stories about growing up in the hood. And I'm not knocking those stories. Those stories are valid because they are real. However, Black people are not a monolith. We have lived a variety of lives. We have lived a variety of experiences. It's really dangerous to only see the Black trauma narrative represented and not see ourselves in these fun, fast-paced sci-fi fantasy carefree stories that white characters often get. And I can tell you this because I grew up writing. And when I was in 6th grade, I think that was really when I decided I want to be a writer. We would sit down with our writer's notebooks during free time or during our writing time, and I would write these sci-fi fantasy stories. But when I think back on it, all the characters that I wrote about were white. Because I didn't think that Black girls, that Black boys could exist within sci-fi or fantasy stories. I didn't think that there was a place for us in these stories because we weren't written into those stories. When I read sci-fi or fantasy books, they were usually white protagonists. And if there was a Black person in there, it was someone standing behind at a market stall, or a slave, or someone who wasn't central to the storyline. And it really impacted how I wrote, how I read, how I drew. I was very into art in high school, and when I go back and flip through my sketchbooks, all the characters that I drew were white and had straight hair. So not seeing myself represented in these stories, not seeing the joy of sci-fi, the joy of fantasy, or just joy in general, the joy of what it means to be Black represented in these stories, really impacted how I interacted with texts, the stories that I wrote, and ultimately turned me off from reading when I was in high school because I was tired of only seeing Black trauma in movies, in books, in magazines, on the TV. I was just tired of it. So I stopped reading in high school because I just didn't want to see the Black trauma narrative anymore. It wasn't until 2019 when I started talking to some of my more bookish friends, and they started talking to me about books and the Black authors that were getting published in sci-fi and fantasy, that I thought, okay, there's starting to be a shift. I can get back into reading. It made me really happy because some of the books that I'm about to talk about, I didn't get when I was in middle school, and I wish I had. So what I wanted to sit down and do today was share with you some stories by Black authors that I really enjoy that have Black people at the center, at the forefront on either their sci-fi adventure, their fantasy adventure, their life adventure. Some of these stories are contemporary, but they all speak to me in a really special way because they're books that I wish I had some of them when I was in middle school. So the first book on that list should come as no surprise. It is The Sound of Stars by Alicia Dow. I have been yelling about this book since I got on BookTube. I love The Sound of Stars so much because at the center of it, we have a Black girl. We have a Black girl who is going on an intergalactic mission with an alien to try and save humanity. And this was the type of story that I wish I had in middle school. It is the exact type of adventure that I wanted to go on when I was in middle school. I didn't think Black girls got to go on intergalactic adventures and become friends with humanoid aliens who like to sing Raspberry Beret by Prince. Okay, I didn't think we got those stories. But now, as an adult, I get to read these stories by Black authors who put them out there and say, no, we get to exist in these spaces. And does The Sound of Stars touch on racism? Yes, because it's something that we experience on a daily basis, but it's not at the forefront. At the forefront, it is a Black girl on this mission to try and save humanity with her love for books and the aliens' love for music, and I love it. Okay, I will never stop talking about The Sound of Stars. Ever. The second book I wanted to talk about is Hair Love by Matthew A. Cherry. I love this book so much. When I saw it in Target, I picked it up, I hugged it, and I started crying. And here's why. I didn't learn how to do my hair really until I was in college. Okay, correction. I didn't learn how to do anything to my hair other than blow dry and straighten it until I got to college. I was very into, emo culture, so I had to have that straight side swoop. The hair had to be perfectly flat. And that was kind of just what I thought I was supposed to do because I needed hair that was supposed to be more manageable or straighter, or I needed it to be straight to look cool and fit in with everyone else who was doing their straight, swoopy emo fringe and listening to My Chemical Romance. Anyway, when I got to college, I had friends on my floor who taught me about natural hair care and took me to the hair store and taught me products that I could buy. And since then, it's been a ride of learning how to take care of my hair, learning how to detangle it, learning how to twist it properly. And I find so much joy in the book Hair Love because I still see myself as an adult in that little girl, because there are still days where I try and follow a YouTube tutorial and it doesn't work out. I have to go back to the drawing board or find something else. I still see myself a lot in that little girl. After the book came out, the hairstyle that she has at the end, the 3 buns going down the middle of her head, I copied that hairstyle a couple of times because I was just so happy about having that book, about having a book about a little Black girl who loves her hair and loves what she can do with her hair, loves the magic of her hair, loves the way that her hair moves and the things that her hair can do. And I'm not saying that it's not frustrating. Again, we watch her get a little frustrated with her hair, but it's moving past that frustration and still finding the love in your curls and what they can do. So yeah, that's the second book I wanted to talk about, was Hair Love. Third book I wanted to talk about is The Stars and the Blackness Between Them by Junauda Petrus. I read this book last year and I'm actually rereading it this month. I loved The Stars and the Blackness Between Them so much. It was another book that made me cry. I cried at the end. I loved how at its core it's about 2 Black girls falling in love. I love the spiritual elements that were woven through it. One of the characters does deal with homophobia and the book does touch on racism, but again, at its core, it's about 2 Black girls falling in love and learning to care for each other. The Stars and the Blackness Between Them by Junauda Petrus. I thoroughly love this book and I can't wait to reread it. The fourth book that I wanted to talk about is Maya and the Rising Dark by Rena Barron. Having a Black girl at the forefront of a fantasy story, a Black girl who loves comic books and goes on this adventure to save her dad, was the kind of story that I wish I had had when I was in middle school, because I didn't get to see myself in stories where Black girls got to go on magical, mystical adventures to save their dads. I'm happy that all these stories exist, not just for middle schoolers now who get to read these middle grade books about Black characters who get to go on these adventures, but also for those of us who didn't get those stories in middle school and get them now, and now we get to see ourselves represented when we didn't when we were younger. One of the things I love about Maya and the Rising Dark is it features a girl who loves comic books and loves things like Comic-Con, and that was something that I was very much into when I was in middle school, and I'm still into now. But when I was in middle school, it was something that I got teased for, because comic books and Comic-Cons were things that were, only supposed to be for white boys. And I got told that by my white peers constantly. So again, the gatekeeping starts at a really, really young age. So to have a book where you have a Black girl who loves going to Comic-Cons and loves reading comic books, it's really heartwarming to see, and it makes me happy again because I didn't get these stories when I was younger. So now we just get to see these Black girls existing and loving sci-fi and comic books and Comic-Cons, and that's who they are. The last book I want to talk about is an adult contemporary book. It is Take a Hint, Danny Brown by Talia Hibbert. Now, if you watched my video on my goals for 2021. One of those goals was to read more adult contemporary romance because it has typically been a genre that I stay away from. Take a Hint, Dani Brown completely changed that for me. The center of Take a Hint, Dani Brown, we have a Black woman who is a PhD candidate, and she has to fake a relationship with the security guard at the college that she works at, and they end up falling in love. And I'm normally not a fake relationship to real relationship. I'm not a big fan of that trope. I loved being able to see a Black woman not only chase after her dreams, not only chase after her PhD, and one of the things I loved about Dani Brown was I saw a lot of myself in her thought process, her wall of sticky notes. I loved seeing that because when I write, there's sticky notes everywhere. I have a whole hutch above my desk that's just sticky noted up. So I saw a lot of myself in Dani Brown. So again, as an adult, being able to read adult contemporary romance that has a Black woman at the center of it who falls in love with this vulnerable former rugby player security guard, and the romance between them was beautiful. It was nice to see it at the forefront of a story. It was nice to see her Blackness at the forefront of the story. It wasn't something to the side. And I think what I loved the most about Take a Hint, Dani Brown, which is one of the things that I loved about a lot of these stories that I've mentioned, is that at its core, it's just about a Black woman being a Black woman, navigating her life, and falling in love with someone. And I think that's really special, that with these stories, the Black trauma narrative isn't centered. We're not saying that these characters don't experience racism or don't experience injustice, but there's so much more to being Black than experiencing the racism and experiencing the injustice. And that's why it's important to see these characters experience life outside of that, find themselves on intergalactic adventures, experimenting with their hair, going to Comic-Con, falling in love with former rugby player security guards. It's so important to see ourselves represented in different parts of life because, as I said earlier, we are not a monolith. We have lived different lives. We come from different cultures, different countries, different life experiences that have shaped us all into different people. So it's really important to see ourselves in these stories where we get to be happy, and we get to not only be happy, but we get to be happy while being Black. We get to be happy because we're Black. Take that into consideration for non-Black readers during the month of Black History Month. Yes, read Black authors, but don't stop reading Black authors on February 28th. Read Black authors throughout the entirety of the year. We don't cease to exist in February. Just as we exist throughout the year, Black books and Black authors exist throughout the year. And I have given you some great suggestions with books that center Black joy and have Black characters who love being Black and are happy and go on amazing adventures. So please take a look at some of these books and explore these books and read them, not just during the month of February. What are some of your favorite books that include Black joy? Let me know in the comments. Give a like, give a subscribe if you feel so inclined, and I will see everyone in the next video. Bye!